Hello，聽唔聽到？
Hello Bernie，聽到。Hello
聽
Bernie，
到，OK，
聽到，唔該晒。得我哋應該1分鐘之後就會開始㗎。
OK，OK。
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Zoom session. Things will never be the same again. I would like to introduce myself. My name is David Ye Jr. I'm the Chief Empowerment Officer of Destiny Research Institute. So first of all, I would like to extend my great gratitude and thank you to everyone who joined us during lunchtime. I understand that everybody probably have some lunch plans or very hungry to go out for a bite, but I really appreciate everybody staying here today. And I understand a lot of people turn in their question before the Zoom session, which we have received. So we very much appreciate of your input. And we hope that today's session will be a great, valuable insight for all of you. So first of all, let me introduce my co-host today, Mr. Eric Sampson. So Eric, would you like to introduce you a little bit yourself to everybody here?
Yes, absolutely. So thank you very much, David. A great pleasure for me to be here for this particular webinar, and nice to see some new faces. So welcome for those who are joining us for the first time from a number of places around the world, and for our friends in Hong Kong, 早晨，大家好，歡迎咁多位今日嚟咗同聽下 David 同我傾下傾啊。We hope you enjoy the session. We hope you will have some valuable takeaways from the session. And we really hope that you will also share your thoughts and share your questions. We'll have some opportunities to use the chat room. So if you have a question, we will definitely have a Q&A at the end. But if something comes up as we go through the process, throw the question in the chat room. We'll do our very best to keep an eye for that. And hopefully we'll cover that towards the end as well. So looking forward to the session this afternoon.
Yeah, Eric, many people may not know that you actually born in Hong Kong. So you're back in New Zealand for a while, but you've been living here for quite a long time. So I really appreciate you using Cantonese to greet some of our audience today. So everybody, I really encourage today all the participants to stay to the end, because we'll be having our Q&A sessions. So you can submit your question on chat box, or if you don't mind, you can open up your mic and ask your question. So myself and Eric will be able to address you. And also we'll have a lucky draw at the end. So we really encourage you to stay to the very end. Someone in this group will be lucky enough to receive something very special from Eric at the end of the session. So Eric, so why don't we start by talking about the COVID era? I think during the last 3 years, we've been experiencing something that is unprecedented of. We had never experienced something like this in our lifetime. And we were basically wearing masks for 959 days. Do you believe it? We were basically wearing masks in Hong Kong for 959 days. Now we're off, with the mask. And I've been talking with a lot of my friends. And one of my friend, Elvin, actually, he's a business owner. He owns a technological company. And he's been telling me, David, before the COVID era, I have over 100 engineers and software designers in my office. But today, 80% of them were gone. So only 20% were left. So this is something that Elvin himself has been facing at this post-COVID era, replacing talents, recruiting talents again. And I'm sure that another incident probably rings everyone's attention is we have this work from home mentality and work from home practice for the last 3 years. So many people are used to the flexibility with working at home, using Zoom, just like today, and not everybody has to come back to office. However, since all the restrictions have been lifted off and we kind of resume back to the normal, a lot of companies really requesting their staff to go back to the office and being at the physical office themselves. And if you all know, one very famous company, a broadband provider in Hong Kong, you probably have guessed the name, they actually suggest everybody, instead of working remotely, now they should be working in the office again. They always use this analogy is everybody is an NBA talent, NBA player. And if everybody practice on their own and not able to practice together inside the pitch or inside the stadium, there isn't much teamwork and collaboration being established over the practice. So Eric, today, I would like you to address these two questions, first of all, and probably share some valuable insights to all of us here at Destiny Research. So now the time is to you. Please.
Yeah, and I think what you've just expressed is the reality of the world that we are emerging into. And that quote that things will never be the same again, we went through such a period of disruption, a period of change, unprecedented change for many of us, a period of huge transition. And as you mentioned, we're coming back into what is going to be our new normal, but our new normal is very different from the normal that we had before COVID. One example being this concept of working from home. And in a traditional business sense, we want people in the office, we want to be able to talk to them, but it may be difficult to convince them to give up something that proved to be really, really very valuable. So, I think one of the questions would be therefore, what are we going to talk about today? Because the subject is really, really broad. So I think there's really three critical things that we should be asking ourselves. And number one would be, why are our employees leaving? Whether it's immediately or whether just before COVID came to an end, or maybe we're starting to see that now. And of course, that's a follow-up, because if our employees are leaving, we need to bring new employees into our organization. But why is it so difficult to attract new employees? Not for every industry, but for many, many industries, it is a real struggle. And then that raises another question, which is really, if we are going to attract new people and bring them on board, fantastic. But how do we make sure that our existing staff are valued, are high performers, and the people we bring on board, how do we make sure that they will stay? And how do we encourage people to join our organization? And these are just a few of the questions that many business leaders are having to ask themselves today. So what we want to do today is to try to share some insights, maybe some strategies, and best practice for building a thriving and engaged team in this post-pandemic world. And we also want to introduce this concept of creating a coaching culture, which will help answer the questions we've raised here, but also to create an environment where our staff will feel valued and valuable, and feel that they are heard and seen and respected, but also to reward them in a way that is appropriate to their needs, which may not be just in terms of money and benefits. And of course, if we want to retain them, we have to keep them feeling motivated, and we have to keep them challenged as well. So I think the things that we want to focus on today will revolve around that concept of attracting talent in the change world, retaining top performance, and really, really motivating your team in these uncertain times. And the reality is this last 3 years has changed the way people think about work. A lot of people, as you mentioned, David, have discovered the benefits of remote work, and they may really be reluctant to return to this traditional office environment. And others are looking for new opportunities as the job market starts to recover, and there's new opportunities for those as well. So attracting new talent really is only half the battle. And you've got the great team in place. How do you keep them engaged and motivated? And the other reality is the pandemic has forced a lot of employees to reassess what their priorities are. And many of them these days are looking for more than just a paycheck from their job. I mentioned before, they want to feel valued, supported, but they also want to feel that they are part of something meaningful. The other side effect of the pandemic has been the uncertainty and anxiety that many employees have felt and continued to feel as well. They've been worried about their health, they've been worried about their job security, they've been worried about their finances. And as business leaders, it's our job to help our teams feel supported and empowered all through these challenging times. Now, traditionally, the way we probably would have approached this would have been to offer them more money or maybe better benefits than our competitors were, right? To attract and retain good staff. And we motivated them with KPIs or targets, and we rewarded those who met or exceeded those targets with bonuses, either cash or in kind. But the flip side would be that if they didn't meet those KPIs or the goals, in effect, we were punishing them by not giving them those same bonuses. The reality in this new world is that wages alone can't solve these problems because the issues go far deeper than money. And the one thing that hasn't changed, though, is the need for effective workplace communication, because that is impacting and influencing every aspect of your employees' experience and how your people feel and talk about your organization, and therefore has a direct impact on your retention and recruitment of staff. So if I look at the current state of the world out there, I'm just going to quote a recent study from McKinsey that says that as many as 40% of employees say they are likely to leave their jobs in the next 3 to 6 months, even if they don't have another job to go to. Now, in Hong Kong, traditionally, that doesn't happen, right? I know people job hop, and often they'll job hop quite a few times, but because they've got something to go to. But the difference now is people have reassessed their priorities, and even if there isn't a job for them, that's not going to stop them necessarily leaving. And one of the problems is that employers don't actually understand why the employees are leaving. And they don't understand what really matters to their employees either. So according to McKinsey, there's a real disconnect between what maybe we as employers believe their employees want and what the employees actually want and need. And again, if we look at that, it's just to show, perhaps in a graphic format, the reality, 40% of people are somewhat likely to job hop or job change or even career change, regardless of whether or not they've got something to go to. And the reality is that many companies are falling short and failing to communicate effectively with their teams. And they are failing to use communication to attract and retain this talent. So one area that all companies really should be looking at is, how do we reframe our approach to how we communicate with our employees? And one way we can do that is to consider moving to this concept of a coaching approach to the issues we've identified, and maybe more particularly in these times of great transition, the concept of transitional coaching as well. And that raises the question, So what can we do to improve retention? And this list is by no means exhaustive, but maybe for me, these are possibly top three. We need to look at that question of workplace flexibility. We talked about working from home, hybrid. Some companies are moving to actually like a 4-day working week as well. We're seeing that maybe in parts of Europe and the Americas, and maybe it's something that becomes important here in Hong Kong and Asia as well. We need to provide better training, and that's something that we've had a few questions about. What happens if we train people and they decide to leave? And maybe we'll address that issue as well. And again, that concept of communicating with your employees. And this quote that I've stuck in there is so true. Your communication abilities influence the overall culture. They foster a sense of belonging and inclusion for your staff, and they improve the overall employee experience. And that is the key to retention. And that key will also have an impact on your bottom line. And it can be a positive impact, or it may be a negative impact if we don't communicate and we don't retrain our staff. So the one thing that everybody has gone through in the last 3 years really is this concept of change. So I want to talk a little bit about the impact of change. I think we've all experienced it. So the one question that comes to mind when I think about the change we've been through in the last 3 years in particular is really this question. So think about your own business, your own organization. What was it that dragged your business into the digital and virtual world? What was it? Was it an enlightened CEO who thought this is the way of the future? Did your COO suddenly say, hey, this is the way we should be operating from now on? Was it the CFO suggesting that this could be a more cost-effective way, having people working from home and we don't need so much office space, for example? Or was it COVID-19?
I think, Eric, before all the participants type in their answer on the chat room, which we'd love to know, I'd love to share about my experience. I remember, I think in March 2020, we were so concerned about the development of the COVID era. We thought our business will be completely disrupted, and we probably, business will be running out of business. But at the end of the day, I think it was for us, COVID did alerted us to go into online, go into a lot of virtual offerings, so that our business can turn into a new model. So I'm sure that different industry, perhaps they have their own encounters and experience. We'd love to understand from all of you. What do you think, who and what dragged your business into the digital and virtual world? Yeah, I'd love to hear your answers too.
Yeah, so I'd invite everyone just to very quickly drop a note into the chat room and let us know. And I might be wrong. There may be some of you who were prescient and could see the changes that were coming. So you might have been that fantastic COO or CEO who could literally do a bit of crystal ball gazing and say, this is the way of the future. Yeah. I think for most of us, the reality is the change that we experienced was not a change that we wanted. It was not a change that we welcomed. And for many of us, we actually thought for quite a while that we don't need to change. This will only last for a short time, right? Things will come right. So why should we invest money in technology? Why should we change our business model? Let's just ride this out. We've had SARS, we've had bird flu, we've had all these things, and they always come to an end. So maybe that's the way. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out. And if we were slow to adopt change, to react and reflect on our changed environment, for some of us, that really was a deal breaker. And David, you and I both know a lot of businesses went out of business over this particular period. Some of them just because they couldn't survive, but many because they either didn't know how to, or they were reluctant to adopt change.
Yeah, I think when you speak about that, especially for business that has many physical locations, I think the COVID restriction have definitely stop them for conducting business. So the business, they have to immediately change the business model right away. So I think you're very right. But obviously, we have witnessed this business whose revenue have grown 30% or even 40% more than it has been, because they quickly have adapted virtual offerings and online services into their product and service. So they immediately prospers from there. So even if I look back from now, I mean, there are a lot of unsuccessful examples, but there are also some successful examples which we can model on as well.
But you're absolutely right. And if I think back to the early days of Zoom, when we first started Zooming, if we'd been able to invest into that business, invest into that industry, I think some of us would be laughing all the way to the bank, as they say, right? And there were some businesses where traditionally everything was done face to face, and for example, training and coaching and meeting. You know, the number of business meetings we used to do regionally, fly in, fly out, meet your team, meet your client, and suddenly the new dynamic was completely different. And a lot of people thought this will never work, but the reality was we understood that we had to change, and we followed some particular principles. And some of these things have not changed. So when I talk about the concept of having to deal with change, there's really 5 principles. And whether we're thinking about the next 6 months, the next year, whatever the case may be, one thing I can guarantee is that things will continue to change. So we need to remember that we don't react in the same way. Everyone will react differently to change. Some of us are more open to it. Some of us feel threatened. Some of us really, really push back on this. But everybody has their own fundamental needs. And we need to be making sure that as employers, as a place where we want people to feel safe and valued, that we are thinking about what those core needs might be. And part of that is for us to remember that for some people, change actually involves loss. It may not be monetary loss, but it may loss of relationships, loss of opportunities. In some cases, it may well be the fact that they've lost their career and had to switch, right? So we also have to think about how we manage the expectations of those who are continuing to work for us, but also to think about the expectations of the people that we are trying to onboard. And that requires us thinking about what their needs are, that everybody will react differently. That if they have fears and anxieties, we have to make sure that we are also dealing with those as well. So we could really maybe even think about this change and throw it into 3 separate buckets. We can think about how we plan for change. We can think about how we deal with the people when it comes to a change environment. And we can also think a bit more about how we communicate in a changing world. How do we communicate the change more effectively so that we address some of those fears, we address some of those concerns? You know, we make sure that people feel individually valued. So let me talk about planning. And this is, I'm not going to go into any great deal of depth of detail about this, except there should be some planning. We need to think about what the implications might be. And somewhere within our organization, we have to have a question about the what ifs and, you know, the hows and the whos. We should have a short term and maybe a longer term plan as well. And this concept of staying nimble, staying flexible, and being able to react quickly is really, really critical for any future change. And we have to think about the people. So we would have to maybe anticipate how they are going to react to ongoing change. What resistance are they going to put up? And how can we help them deal with the change itself? We might have to develop something for them. Maybe we provide some training opportunities. Maybe we need to give them some coaching. And what's really important also is how we get them to buy in and own a part of this process as well. And one of the critical ways that we do that really is the communication process. We've got to listen to our staff. We've also got to be careful that we ourselves don't get too complacent. You know, we've got our contingency plans in place. We're lean, we're flexible, we can deal with that and everything like that. We have to watch out for developing any kind of complacency around there. And, you know, when we think about our staff, in the interests of being open and honest with them, it's important that if things are going to be difficult, and they might be, we tell our staff, right, that yes, things will be difficult. There will be challenges, but we need to reassure them that we will be able to overcome those particular challenges as well. And I think also from the perspective of how we communicate this change, it's important that our people recognize that leadership is willing to accept responsibility for their role. So if we got something wrong, if we made a mistake, we have to be honest and truthful about it, right? We can't blame other people. We can't blame other factors. If we made the mistake, our ability to accept that responsibility and take that on is a really powerful way to build trust with our people.
Eric,
So if we think about, yes,
I would like to add a little note on this, because when you talk about this, this really rings a bell with me. I think a few weeks ago, I happened to know a person who's from the US who was a FBI hostage negotiator, which you can understand he probably come across with many different people. And there's a book that he recommended me to read. It's called The Like Switch. It's talking about active listening and empathetic listening and questioning. When you talk about the skills, when I talk to a lot of different executives, I think the skills is quite hard for a lot of people. And I definitely love to share a lot of insights with this with all of you here, because I really believe that if we can practice active listening for a longer period of time, being more patient, I think we can definitely improve our communication part. So I think you raised a very important point here, which I love to share with our audience. Maybe later on the chat room, I'll put a link on this book. So maybe people can have a reference to this book and they can always check, what are some of the techniques and some of the communication application that they can use at their workplace. But thanks for raising this point.
Fabulous feedback. And I love the idea of the like switch. And actually, it's important that you mention that, because one of the things that we will talk about in a little while is, the concept of motivation. How do we motivate our staff, right? If they're feeling under pressure, there's a lot of change going around, there's a bit of uncertainty. How do we motivate these staff to give their very best, to want to give their very best? If we're not able to provide, massive salary increases, or we've lost some staff or something like that. And some of the things that you've mentioned become really critical in that process as well. So we've talked through some of the realities of the world that we've come through. We've talked through some of the challenges that this change has brought to us. And we've talked through maybe some of the beginnings of how do we deal with this particular scenario. So that raises the $1 million question, really. So what is the solution? Well, the solution is, as we mentioned, is that companies are failing and falling short of communicating effectively with their teams. So again, I want to reinforce that. Reframe your approach to employee communication. And again, the concept of coaching and transitional coaching is one very powerful way to address some of the issues that we've mentioned and that, David, you've also highlighted as well. So the question is, so what is transitional coaching? I think most of us are familiar with the concept of coaching, whether it's executive coaching or life coaching or something similar. And the elements of transitional coaching follow similar themes. But the point is, it's about a period of transition, a period of change, a period of challenge, a period of uncertainty. So some of the focus of this is really going to be a little bit different. So transitional coaching is going to help you navigate your changing world. It will help you navigate from where you are to where you want to be. It will help you see downsides, upsides, and maybe also sometimes overlooked possibilities. And the reality for ourselves and our teams and our staff is we can't control everything, right? There's lots of external factors that we can't control, but what we can control is how we, you and I, react to the world around us. So transitional coaching will also answer some other questions for you. What's brought me to where I am today? is now the time to move forward? And if it is, how can I move from where I am now to a new phase in life? But it's also going to help you answer questions like, who am I now? After all of this change, after all of this uncertainty, what values are important to me now? What motivates me? Also, and this is something your staff are going to be asking themselves, what do I want? What do I want from my work? What do I want from life? And more importantly, what are my skills, my passions, my interests, and what are my dreams? And how can I apply the knowledge and experience and expertise I've gained in hopefully new and interesting ways? And with a bit of luck, those new and interesting ways are within my organization. I don't have to leave and find something new. So you might ask yourself, okay, if I'm going to buy into the concept, why do people need coaching? And I think the overarching answer would be so that your staff don't lose momentum, right? It will give them a feeling that they have more control over their lives, that their views and thoughts and ideas and fears are addressed and listened to and valued and valuable to us as an organization, especially at times of change and uncertainty. And to be honest, although we are moving into this post-COVID world, we still face change and we still face uncertainty. So transitional coaching will help by allowing the people that we coach to develop new thinking and behavior patterns. It will help to develop their own interpersonal skills and social skills. It will help them to switch from an operational way of thinking that is doing my job from day to day, ticking the boxes, getting to the work on time, meeting my targets, switching from that to a more strategic way of thinking and working and looking at possibilities. And, what can I do to help the company grow? What added value can I offer? And for those who still have some anxiety and fears and insecurity, it will help them overcome those particular challenges, right? And if we're lucky enough to enter into this huge growth phase in the post-COVID world, it will help them retain their own sense of identity, that they don't get lost and become just a cog in the wheel, which is a danger if we grow quickly. Again, some people are going to have a vulnerability if they have to come into this new world, that the dynamic has changed, their working hours, the hybrid flexibility, or even, as David mentioned, the new dynamic after 3 years is they have to come to work every single day when their whole life has been so different for the previous 3 years. It also helps those who are being coached to get buy-in from their team, engagement from their team, and it's a way to help them persevere to complete their tasks, and maybe in a way reduce some of their concerns of worry about failure. So let's talk a little bit about motivation, right? So what drives us? What motivates us to do the things that we do? Now, some of you will be familiar with this. You might have done this way back when, maybe secondary school or university days. It's not new at all. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the reality for us as human beings is there are certain needs that we have to have fulfilled. Number one is physiological needs, food, drink, environmental things that become really, really important. They're biological needs. We all have to have them. We all have needs around safety, stability, home, law and order, a safe workplace, for example. Social needs, a sense of belonging, a sense of importance, where our self-esteem, right, is reinforced. And once those critical elements are in place, then we can start to grow, right? We can start to fulfill our potential. This is the self-actualization part. And this is true for many of us who are of a certain age, baby boomers, This is what drives us. But the world has changed, and the demographics of the people who are now working has switched dramatically. We have a far greater proportion of millennials, and we're getting into the Generation Z, the Generation Z, and their needs are very, very different, which means that their motivation is very different as well. So the pyramid is still there, the hierarchy needs are still there, and that's not to say that millennials don't need the basic needs, food, shelter, that belong to everyone. However, millennials place an incredible amount of focus on belonging, importance, and self-actualization. And in fact, those three advanced needs are often the entirety of their driving motivation. And that's the huge difference from what we have against traditional structure.
I think, Eric, when you mentioned about this chart, I've been coaching a lot of baby boomers, but over the recent years, I've been talking to many millennials, Gen Z, Gen Y, and I really find what you're showing here is so important because their priority have shifted from the previous generation. What they're looking for is completely very different. When you're looking about the purpose, when I talk to a lot of youngsters, they do ask for what's the purpose of the company. They do want to know about the mission statement, the purpose, the values, whether they actually align with what they think is important. Somehow, obviously, apart from remuneration, values is important, but I think these are some of the things that they pay tremendous attention, whether that's a right company fit for them.
And you raise a really good point, because there are a lot of industries and businesses that traditionally would employ graduates, maybe people who had a master's degree, financial industry, financial services, and they would offer them these fantastic salaries to encourage them. The flip side, of course, is that you had to work very hard, very long hours, and you really would be kind of at the bottom of the totem pole. Now, traditionally, that was not a problem. Most financial institutions had no problem recruiting top quality graduates, but the reality is changing because they're asking the same sort of questions that you raise. What is the philosophy of this company? What do you do in terms of giving back to society? And the concept of these huge salaries becomes so much less important to this particular group of people. So we mentioned the sense of belonging, a sense of importance and self-actualization, but they also need structure, which is why it underpins everything in this particular diagram. For most millennials, they have had structure in their lives since the day that they were born, right? So they need to know, what are the rules of the game in which I'm now playing? What is my job? What am I required to do? And what is not my job? And that means that we have to set very clear expectations. What are the rules of the game? And maybe if I can highlight my own experience going back a long, long time when I went into the banking industry. This is when I first moved to New Zealand in like 1980. And this probably give away my age here as well. And I joined banking, and I was taken on as I think like a cadet, a new recruit. And in those days, the training was straightforward, right? You sit next to me and you watch what I do and you copy what I do. And that's how it was done. Okay. And if you ask too many questions, you would get firmly put back in your place. Just watch and just listen and don't ask too many questions. You can't do that anymore because they will certainly ask you their questions. The other thing that's really, really also critical is this concept of feedback. Millennials must get feedback, right? Because otherwise, how are they going to know that they are on the right track? They need feedback as much and as often as you possibly can do it. Now, to be fair, this feedback doesn't necessarily have to be a formal sit down. Today we're going to look at your KPIs and give you some feedback on that. The conversation could just be a very, very simple daily catch up, couple of minutes, ask them how they're doing, talk about their expectations. Are they feeling under pressure? Anything else that they want to talk about? Because for them, that feedback helps them answer the question, how do I know that I am on the right track here? And remember, a sense of purpose, a sense of direction, and a sense of care. Millennials want meaningful work. They want recognition and respect. They want autonomy and flexibility. They want a chance to constantly learn and grow. And let's not forget that they also want to have fun while they are doing those things. Now, again, I'm not saying that everybody else doesn't want meaningful work and that everyone else doesn't want some recognition and respect in terms of how they're seen. But many of us don't need autonomy. We're quite happy to follow a structure and have a process that we need. Some of us enjoy the challenge of learning, but we don't all do. And the reality for some people is work isn't necessarily fun. It's a thing that we go and do, right? But this is not true for the new generation. So we really have to be conscious about how do we make sure that we are pressing the right buttons when it comes to keeping these people motivated. Because if we don't press the right buttons, guess what? They're going to go somewhere else. They absolutely are. And you simply throwing more money at these people to encourage them to stay will not answer the questions about what is my purpose? Am I valued? Do you care about me? So these are the things that are so important in the background.
Yeah, I think when you talk about feedback, I can definitely think about an example that I recently have come across. I've been coaching a group of next gen, and that company really encouraged feedback time, from everybody. Not only they design their office environment to be more feedback friendly, which means that, in the old days, there are many rooms and there's many walls that blocking everybody. They really encourage people to move around and talk with each other. And they also incorporate a lot of different social activities so that people can come in and share their feedback as well. One of the things I'm sure a lot of companies are now doing today is Friday off in the afternoon. And they really encourage people to go to coffee shop, just go with a bunch of colleagues and co-workers as to get some feedback. So just get a casual conversation. So that kind of implementation, that kind of habits and regime is really encouraging people to give more feedbacks. And sometimes we always occupy with phone and then we don't really have a break. If we're able to do so, I think it's a really healthy practice to be held in an office too.
I think that's really a perfect example. And when you raise it, just reminded me of something. I mean, how many of you now work in an environment where you've moved away from offices and have moved to an open plan environment, right? You may even have a hot desking environment. And, so our businesses say we are embracing this concept of open plan. There are no barriers. Everybody's free to provide feedback and work next to everybody else as well. But the trouble, it doesn't work for everybody, right? And if you don't believe me, if you maybe look for one of the maybe the longest serving members of your company, even in an open plan office, even if it's hot desking, they have a particular seat they like to sit in, right? Particular location. So imagine if you decided, okay, you know what? I'm going to be a disruptor. I'm going to go and sit where they normally sit. Just see what impact that has on that person when they come to sit in what has become their place, right? Now, that's not true for the millennials and the Gen Z. They could care less, right? They'll sit in the corner with their laptop, whatever the case may be. They don't have that same requirement. So again, it's remembering the differences and catering for those different needs of those different sectors. And this concept of motivating some members of your team, it's not really that difficult, right? There are some things that we all should do, regardless of whether it's the post-COVID or pre-COVID or whatever the case may be, which is you've really got to know your people, right? Really show an interest in them, their lives, their families, their interests, their hobbies, and find out about what it is that gives them meaning or direction in their life. What fills their bucket? What is their passion? And there's actually a selfish reason for that, because if you understand what that passion is, okay, what fills their bucket, maybe that's a way that you can use within the working environment to provide the motivation for them to want to do more, to achieve more in the work environment as well. And remember, you've got to be human with people, your people. That means being authentic. And to do that, you have to spend time with them. You know, one of the things that really had an impact over COVID was we missed the opportunities to bump into people while we were getting a coffee and have a little chat and a catch up and, you know, how are you and what's happening? And when we started getting into these Zoom meetings and online, everyone was busy and time was short. We didn't do as much of that kind of socializing. So again, we've got to think about that. You know, part of being human is really acknowledging the people around us. And one of the simplest things that you can do to build a relationship with people around you is acknowledging them and simply smiling, right? And if we want to also encourage and motivate, you've got to give praise to people, which is meaningful. So it should be genuine and it should be specific. And it shouldn't be, oh, you know, good job, high five, all that kind of stuff, which a lot of people will do, but it's got to be genuine. And if it's really specific to something that someone has done, especially if they thought no one had noticed, but you noticed, how powerful that is that in terms of motivating them to want to keep on doing that. And again, in the same way as we need to get to know them a bit more about their home life and their hobbies, what are their job aspirations? What do they like about what they're doing? What for them is going well? What's not going so well? What are the challenges and what can we do to support them in that environment? And this is where it falls upon us as managers and management and leaders to really think about what are we doing to address all of those questions. Now, I know if I was to ask this question, what is management, I would get a range of answers. So I might just ask, you know, our participants, for you, if you had to define management, how would you describe it? And I invite you maybe to put your thoughts in the chat room and let's see whether we can come to any kind of consensus about how we all see this question of what management is. I'll give you a minute or two to share your thoughts in the chat room. Intrigued to see where we might come from.
I think, you know, I think, as you said, everybody probably have different answer towards this question, but this is a really great question to ask. What's management? And I'm sure we'll probably, you know, gain some insights from our audience as well.
So I'm hoping that someone might give me a fantastic definition. Let's see who can I see on screen that I might be able to volunteer to perhaps give us some. Now I can see Bernie on screen, and Bernie is looking very attentive. So Bernie, do you mind if I ask you? Would you be able to share from your perspective? What does management mean to you?
Bernie, you can use the mic, or you can.
Please,
yeah.
If you feel comfortable, I'll ask you to unmute, and maybe you can share that thought with us, or chat. Your call.
I think Bernie just typed the answer, Eric. To be the leader and make things happen. Thank you, Bernie, for your participation.
To be the leader and make things happen, and I agree that would be one aspect of management.
If you don't mind me, are you guys hearing me now?
Yes.
Yes, we hear you. Yeah.
I think to be management, you are managing multi-directional. So you're not only going one way or the other. So it's more how you manage expectation of all the involved people to make things happen, not the way that company says. Say if my boss gave me a goal, I need to make this goal their goal, not the boss's goal. So it's an ownership of everybody trying to do the same thing, you know, rather than me telling you what to do. So management.
I love that, because what you've said is you've got buy-in from people, that they are doing it because they want to do it,
Yes.
because they feel it's important, not because they've been told to do it. And you know,
Exactly.
the basic reality is management is getting things done, as you mentioned, as
Yeah.
a leader, but getting things done through others. And good
Yeah.
management involves knowing the people who work for you, their abilities, right? You've got to make sure the right people are tasked with the right jobs, their preferences, their strengths, and also their weaknesses, the areas they need to
Yes.
work on. And if we know these things, we not only get things done, but we get them done more effectively and efficiently. You see,
Yeah.
here's the thing.
You know, you don't
Management
want
has,
to, you don't want to micromanage them.
yeah, absolutely
Yeah.
right. And that's important because management has evolved and changed over the years. You know, we've moved from a kind of industrial environment to a world of technology. Now we've just had COVID, which has changed how we work and therefore how we manage people as well. You know, traditionally, there was very much a command and control style of leadership, and that involved a lot of telling people what to do, right? But now people have more choices. People are better informed, and people are motivated by different things as well. So these days, there's a lot less of that telling people what to do. There's a lot more about collaboration, working with teams, getting people to share their knowledge and their skills and their ideas. There's a lot more focus on, you know, what we sometimes call the soft skills for you as the manager to get the best performance and contribution from your people and from your teams, right? So if I was to ask you, all of you on the call today, this question, which of these management skills do you believe that you would need to develop the most to retain and attract talent? Would it be delegation? Would it be performance management? Would it be feedback? Would it be motivating people? Would it be coaching and developing people? And again, I'd welcome you to throw your thoughts into the chat room. I just want to say thank you to Chiwa also for sharing thoughts about management, but just thinking about management skills, which of those things do you think that you personally, or perhaps your business or company, needs to develop the most to retain and attract talent? Is it delegation, performance, feedback, motivation, or coaching and development of people?
I
I
love
got
to
feedback
share
from
my answer too. I think for me, it's managing performance. I
managing
think that,
performance. Okay, yeah.
that's pretty, challenging for me. So I love to develop the right KPIs so that I can track the performance. But I'm sure other people probably have other thoughts as well.
Well, I've had three different approaches. I've had someone who thinks that coaching and developing is important. Someone else has mentioned feedback. See what else comes in there. And I think that the reality would be that all of those answers are right. All of those answers are right. But actually, most importantly, we as managers and we as businesses actually need to develop all of those skills to retain and attract talent, okay? Because they are each a link in the process of creating an environment where your staff will feel safe and heard and recognized and challenged and valued and rewarded and validated as people, whether it's socially or professionally. So all of those elements are all things that we need to be conscious of, and we need to be making sure that we don't ignore one of those because we think that maybe the motivation part's more important. All of those should be part of how we look at this world. And we talked a little bit about management and management, how things have changed. The most basic style or most basic model I think I can bring, and some of you again will be familiar with this, is the tell, sell, consult, and join mentality. The tell is very much old school, where management gives a lot of direction, and people don't have a lot of autonomy about what they do. And it might be because actually they're new to the task, they're not very experienced, or they haven't got high expectations and they're keen to learn. But it's very limiting. It's very limiting, right? So what we might find is that we have to use a more selling style of management where we give direction, but we also give encouragement. And that can be very, very helpful where we're dealing with people who've been working in their role or their job for some time. They may have raised their skill levels or competency because they've been doing it for a while, but actually that could also lead to a sense of slight frustration and disillusionment because I've been doing this for a while. I know what I'm doing now. Is that all there is? So we have to provide the encouragement to keep motivating those people as well. But realistically, for the type of world in which we are coming into, I think the last two styles become more important. The consulting style, where we do less direction, where we encourage people. We might suggest that this is how they could accomplish it, but we also ask them to maybe come up with some ideas about what might work best. We're giving them some involvement in there. And the final one, which is the join style, really this is almost the equivalent of a coaching approach, right? My role as a manager is really only to facilitate, to check on your progress, answer any questions that you might be having, but it's all about what should we be doing? And then when we know what we should be doing, how do we achieve that? And it's really important to make sure that we use the right management style at the right time and for the right situation and scenario in which we find ourselves. Now, the reality is whichever one of these styles that we adopt or we use, there will always be an issue about performance, right? There will always be some performance gap. It might be that some of your staff say, oh, I can't do it. And some of them say they don't know how to do it. And some of them might say they won't do it. And each of those requires a different response. So for those who can't do it, the reason is either a lack of ability, although that's something we can overcome, or a lack of skill. So if there is a lack, a good solution for us is to make sure that we give them the right kind of training and development that they need, right? That's fairly simply fixed. If they didn't know, then that's really about the lack of awareness of expectation. So the response would be that we have to be better at managing your expectations. We have to inform, we have to brief, we have to communicate better. Maybe we have to change the types of people we recruit. Maybe we have to focus on our onboarding so that people no longer have this excuse to say, I didn't know. And of course, if you've got people who won't do it, there's a lack of motivation. Skill is not the issue is will. So how do we encourage and engage and motivate these people? And this is where we start to come into the magic of the coaching approach. Because if we think about our millennials and Gen Z, we start to understand how they can be demotivated, right? So if we understand how they can be demotivated, we then know how we can help to motivate them. So one of the things that we're all aware of is a very typical performance management cycle, right? We as the business set targets, we drop them down a couple of levels. Maybe a division has their own targets. We then set individual targets for people. We put together some kind of development plan. We monitor their performance. And at the end of it, we give them some kind of feedback, appraisal, performance review. And if they've done a great job, maybe we give them some kind of a bonus, right? But the reality is that this is no longer enough. This concept of appraisal, performance review, feedback needs to get done on a much, much more regular basis. Remember those millennials, they need constant and frequent feedback, right? It doesn't have to be formal. A cup of coffee, lunch, even a 5-minute check-in a couple of times per week. That's the critical thing. And the reason I wanted to highlight this is that if you're still operating with a model like that, the biggest problem is when you get round to that annual appraisal or annual performance, by the time you get to that, the reality is you may already have lost that staff member. Now, lost in the sense they might have resigned, but maybe they have checked out up here, or they are kind of going into that slow resignation, or the quiet quitting that we've heard so much about. That is a huge danger of that. So we have to look at how we make sure we help people to improve in their performance. And traditionally, there's things we can do, right? There's training, there's development, give them more qualifications, send them on a course might be the answer. But for me, the answer really in particular for, the high value, the high potential, the talent is the coaching and possibly the mentoring approach as well. These are really, really important. And again, one of the things that we can look at is where is the issue and how do we react in the appropriate way? If you've got someone who has a low will and low skill, very straightforward. We train, we coach, we supervise, clear feedback, clear expectations. But when you start getting to people who've got maybe a high skill, but low will, again, how do we excite them? How do we develop that sense of intrinsic motivation so that when they take something on, it's not I'm doing it because I've been told to do it. I'm doing it because I want to do it. I'm engaged in this process. And where you've got people who have high skill and high will, how do I keep growing them? How do I keep challenging them? I don't want them to get stale. Remember those millennials? They want to be constantly rewarded. So this is where we have to really, really communicate. And the coaching approach will allow us to really help them to stretch themselves, to widen their goals, to broaden their responsibilities, and maybe for them to take more responsibility for their own development. And it's critical because the reality is if we don't measure what gets done, and if we don't recognize what gets done, again, and even better, then we are missing out on an opportunity. So what measured gets done is important. That's why we set goals. But what gets recognized, i.e. praise, gets done better and better and hopefully even better. So that's why it's so important to think about feedback, right? Giving feedback, the appropriate feedback at the appropriate time. All right, so same quick question for you. How confident are you right now in terms of giving feedback to your team? 1 to 5, are you not confident at all with minimal experience, or very confident and had a lot of experience giving feedback? So just let me know where you think you sit within that quantum. Are we number 1? Are we number 3? Are we number 5? Where do you think you sit in terms of your confidence when it comes to providing feedback? Thank you. I've got someone who's think that's 5. Wonderful. Someone's, oh, we got a few 4s in there as well. And that might reflect on, who is our team? Where do we sit with that environment? What is our own personal experience? I'm pleased to see that we're getting a lot of 4s and things like that. Fantastic. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay. Now here's another question. Would that score change if you were giving that feedback to your peers or maybe a senior manager? Because I'm pretty sure that for most of you, when I said feedback, you were thinking about giving feedback to your team and those below you, right? So maybe ask yourself that question. How confident would I now be if I was giving feedback, not to my team, but to my peer group, or maybe even more senior people? Okay, there's a couple of you who think that would not be a problem, and I'm glad to hear that. But some of you have said it was a 4, but now that you've maybe asked that question, maybe I'm less confident. And this might be the reality, okay? So we have to think about who we are giving feedback to and maybe how we give that feedback. And are we giving feedback on performance, or are we giving feedback on behavior? Right, interesting question.
That's a really good insight, Eric.
Yeah. Are we looking at people's capability, or are we looking at their conduct? And how are we feeding back in the appropriate way? So again, feedback for me is, it can be difficult, but feedback really is a gift. Now, if I give you feedback in the same way as I give you a gift, you might not like the gift that I give you, right? You might not like the gift that I give you, but I'm giving you a gift. I took the trouble to select a gift, right, that I thought that you would like. I've gift wrapped it. I've taken the trouble to give it to you. So you can't really question my motives from there. So the feedback I'm giving to you comes from a good place, like the gift I'm giving to you. Your challenge is to decide what you do with that feedback, right? And if that feedback is difficult, if that feedback is uncomfortable, that is something that you have to deal with. And if you get that kind of feedback from someone, we have to be very careful that we're not then punishing that person for giving us the feedback that we don't like to hear. All right, so moving on, and in particular, given the kind of demographic we're talking about, let's think about being able to give motivational feedback, right? Motivational feedback is powerful. And if we want to encourage people to repeat positive behavior, then we need to reward that positive behavior. And that means it should be immediate. It's no good coming to me 3 or 4 weeks later, a month later, and saying, oh, by the way, David, you did a great job 3 or 4 weeks or a month and a half ago. Okay, if it was that great, why didn't you recognize it at the time? It also has to be very specific about what you are recognizing. Don't make it a generalization. And maybe one of the powerful things is by telling me or the team what their what their success or their actions have resulted in for other people as well. I would say don't overdo it, be genuine, right? And create that positive atmosphere. And if it's happened in a team environment, we have to recognize the whole team, but there may be a particular individual within that team who could do with a bit of a boost, a bit of an encouragement, and maybe a little bit of motivation for the feedback as well. So maybe that is the person we should also be singling out for a bit of additional positive or motivational feedback as well. Now, again, we've been talking about giving feedback, but what about asking for feedback? As managers, how often do we ask for feedback? How willing are we to accept feedback? And if I was trying to really build my team, and I was really trying to engage my team, and I really wanted to motivate and retain my top talent, as well as giving them feedback, I would absolutely be asking for feedback from them. How am I doing as a manager? What am I doing well? And what do you need more from me? What do you need less of from me as well? Okay, what can I do to help you to achieve, to be your very best, so that we as a group, as an organization, can be the very best that we can be as well? And that leads us on to a really significant area. And I know that some of you may have had an opportunity to look at the link that was sent out previously to this particular webinar. And that was this question of egonomics. What makes ego our greatest asset or most expensive liability? And I encourage you, if you haven't read this book, go ahead and read it. Now, some of you have already completed the online test, right? The traits or talents that cover most personality types. And I'm pleased to say that we will be sending you the results so that you can see what the reality of this is, okay? Yeah. So I talked about the critical need of getting feedback from the people around us, and in particular around strengths and development areas. So this is an opportunity for us to look at their impact on our business world. And David, I think I interrupted you. I think you had a thought or a question.
I was just very impressed when you passed me the test, because I always want to look for ways to understand more about myself. And we did take a video on this as well, right? I did the test on, in front of camera, and I've given my answer, what is my greatest assets and some of my greatest traits and talents, which are flexible, self-confident, passionate, straightforward, and even optimistic. I always thought these are great traits and great talents. But at the end of the day, when I look at the answer, I find out a lot more about me. Sometimes when I'm being very straightforward, I never thought people might see me as inconsiderate, as a matter of fact. So when I took that test, I really feel that there are a lot of things for me to improve. So for audience who have turned in their economic test, yeah, I think we'll be sending out reply to each of you. But for anyone who haven't taken the test, we do have a QR code at the end of this presentation, which you can, scan it, and then you can send your answer to us. And we are very much happy to provide you some of the answers to all of your traits and talents.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight what you were saying, because you're absolutely right. We want to highlight the things that we see as strengths, and this is our ego. Of course, we want to see ourselves in a particular way. And I would say that there's absolutely nothing wrong with, for example, being competitive or being driven or for being, very technically minded. These are important. However, the reality is, in the world in which we live now, you can't reach your full potential by relying solely on those strengths, right? To achieve your goals and the goals of your organization, you're going to need the cooperation and talents of the other individuals within your group, within your firm. So, in terms of your ego, by practicing a little bit of humility, being open to honest feedback, asking feedback, welcoming feedback, and more importantly, ensuring that you are learning from that feedback, learning from others, this can help you eliminate blind spots that you may have and increase your value as a leader. And so, just to highlight what David was talking about, these things that we see as strengths, there is a flip side to that. And the reality is, the things that we see as strengths or positive in ourselves can often be seen in an alternative and negative way for others. So if I quickly flip back, and let's say, for example, I might have said I was very assertive, dependable, and straightforward, 1-10-19, right? Unfortunately, other people might see number 1 as assertive as being pushy, right? Number 10 as being dependable, maybe as being rigid. I think number 19, straightforward, inconsiderate. Now, I'm not saying that this is, I'm not saying this is reality, but it's perception, right? It's how other people might see those strengths. And the reality is, there is a danger that we might overuse or over leverage those things that we see as our strengths. And over leveraging can create a barrier that in effect is self-sabotaging, or in the case of an organization, can sabotage our business interests. So when people give into their egos, when they insist on using ideas that haven't worked in the past because they feel that their way is the right way, but others see them as being very stubborn, or they refuse to consider suggestions from others or ignore contributions from people they don't like, or even don't do anything because they don't want to make a mistake. So this can create the very effect that we're trying to avoid, a higher turnover rate of your employees, because they don't like dealing with the manager who is driven by their ego and ego-based behavior. So the day-to-day operations of your company may suffer if we don't change course, as soon as those behaviors start to demonstrate this potentially negative problem. So if that's the case, it brings us back again to the question, what is the solution? So remember, in summary, our goal at the beginning of this conversation was really 3 things: to attract talent in a changed world, to retain our top performers, and to motivate our team in uncertain times. And in this post-COVID world, creating an environment where your staff feel safe, heard, recognized, but also challenged and valued and rewarded and validated as people, socially and professionally, is the best way to do that. To attract talent, to retain talent, and motivate our teams. And adopting this suggested coaching approach, the coaching environment, and encouraging everybody also to think about the same is one of the best ways to ensure that we can build and maintain that exact type of business environment for the future. So I kind of come to the end of what I wanted to cover and talk about today. You're probably a bit overwhelmed with everything that we've thrown at you. So here's an opportunity to hear from you. If you have any particular questions that have come about as a result of what we've covered today, or they may have been questions that you actually brought into the session today, and this is our chance and our opportunity to maybe address the questions that you might have. And if you're confident, speak out, unmute your speaker. If you're feeling a bit shy, pa chao, you can always put it into the chat room and we'll just cover it from there for you. But David and I would actually welcome any questions that you may have around the topic we've covered today.
Yeah, I really encourage people to type in the answer, or raise your question, even open up the voice and just speak with us. But I think, Eric, I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing so much insightful information with us today. And I'm sure while people are typing in their answer, there's one question actually was asked by one of my existing clients. And I'm sure that I love to hear your feedback. Is they always been mentioning they spend tremendous resources to grow the talents. But after a few years, they have decided to join some bigger and more well-known companies. What is something that they can do to prevent these incidents from happening again? I mean, obviously, I'm sure people will type in the answer, but while we're waiting, maybe you can address this question from our audience, from our clients as well.
So you're talking about this concept of what happens if I spend this time and invest energy in training and coaching my people, and then they leave.
Yes, exactly.
I think that's the point you're trying to make.
They join some bigger and more well-known companies, right? So obviously a lot of resources, a lot of money, and a lot of time was spent on these people. How can they prevent these things from happening?
Okay, well, I think that the bigger question we should be asking ourselves is, what happens if you don't train those people and don't spend money on coaching them and don't spend money on developing them, and they stay, right? And they stay, and they haven't grown, they haven't learned, they haven't developed, they're not providing anything new or interesting, they're not helping the company to grow. In a perfect world, the time and effort that you spend growing and developing the staff will bring you to the situation where they do want to stay, right? They love the organization, they love the people that they work with, they are being challenged, and they are therefore being rewarded in that particular sense. But there will always be someone who outgrows an organization, right? That's the reality. They outgrow the organization because maybe they've grown more quickly than we have, and they've changed more quickly than we have. And if we lose them, there's not a lot we can do to change their mind, because think about their motivation. We can offer them more money, we can offer them more opportunities, but maybe they're being motivated by something else. Maybe they want to work in a completely different sector, because for them, it answers the question, who am I and what is important to me as well. So the one thing I would suggest to you is that please try to get them to stay, have a better conversation and better communication with them to understand what has motivated them to leave. But if they do go, make sure that you go on very, very good terms, right? Because when they move on to the new organization, you want them to be telling that new organization what a great business they've come from, what great managers. They're the ones who shaped me as to how I am today. And I will be, I have heard great stories where people who have moved to different organizations, grown and developed, and then outgrown those organizations, because they had such a positive experience with where they came from, they come back full circle. They come back to you, even better developed, even better trained, with more skills, but because they had that rewarding experience of working within your business where they felt valued, and important, they will eventually come back. So I think that's the biggest question. What do you stand to lose if you don't train people and you don't grow those people? That for me would be the answer to that particular question.
I see. Thank you for that.
But
So
I think but Bernie has a question, so
yeah.
maybe I'll let Bernie raise his question too. Yeah.
Maybe I will tell you guys where I'm from. I grew up in Hong Kong and went to Australia for a little while, for about 10 years. Then I came back. See, I'm like half Chinese educated, half Western education. But often I've been in the industry for a long time, and I attended I don't know how many of these, sections going about how we run a business or how to motivate people. But my biggest question is, this to me, no offense, but this to me is a Western style of management, which I embrace. I really like. I was brought up in a boarding school, put it that way.
Yeah.
But when I have all this Western mindset in my mind, which I still have, which I still am, my biggest challenge is to adopt this philosophy in managing Chinese people.
Okay.
We have a very different way of communication, or we don't talk as open as Westerners. We don't give feedback. Extremely difficult for traditional Chinese businessmen to give or accept feedback.
Yeah,
which is my biggest
Bernie, I
challenge.
think you have raised a really important question, and I thank you for raising this question about generalizations in the Western world and the Asian world. And let me reflect, because I completely understand where you're coming from. I'm Hong Kong born and bred, right?
Yeah.
My mum is half Chinese. I'm Eurasian. I've worked in traditional businesses here in Hong Kong, and I think the biggest challenge is often the tone that is set from the top. I've worked in companies where you don't leave until the senior managers go home, right? If the senior managers work until 9 o'clock or 9:30 or 10 o'clock, or they work Saturday morning until something, the staff stay there. Now, that doesn't make the staff efficient. That doesn't make the environment more successful, but it's a traditional way of doing it. So part of the question becomes mindset, but part of the solution becomes the tone set by management. And I'm going to engage David in this, because David mentioned about working with some family-owned companies where you have a new generation of management coming in, not the older style, which reflects what Bernie's is saying, is this is what we've traditionally done, but newer management who, like you, traditionally born and raised in Hong Kong, might have done some of their schooling here, sent overseas maybe for university education, maybe master's degree, further education. And they're now being tasked with changing and growing this business in the new world. And that is where the change can start to come in from the top. And David, maybe your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I think when you talk about that, and first of all, thank you for Bernie for raising this question. I think we kind of had a discussion with Bernie before about this, and also addressing Sutanto's question as well. How do we encourage them to give honest feedback? Being Asian in general, being direct is not one of our strengths. I have to say, as I mentioned before, the book, The Like Switch, what I was inspired from that book is sometimes if we sell, if we try to do something with somebody, it's all about building that kind of rapport and building that likability with people. I think, obviously, as we are raised in different culture and different environments, all our upbringing is different. But the thing is, how do we build rapport is really being set in the same proximity, meaning that we're able to communicate within the same kind of language, same kind of context, so we can build likability among each other. Obviously, this is a very big subject that we can discuss for hours and hours of time. But I have to say, by building up the rapport, which is very important, no matter whom you are. Obviously, even though if you are brought up in the same culture, or the same background, if you don't build rapport with people, it's very hard to build up that communication. So I would also encourage building up that rapport in the beginning, try to get that likability in place, and start speaking generally, because I feel that sometimes people do resist suggestion, feedback, or any kind of commands in the very beginning. But as long as we get the rapport from them, we build the recognition from them, I think we'll be able to better communicate with them all along the way.
And maybe I could add an extra thought to that as well, because so Bernie, unless you happen to be like the Loban, the big boss of everything, right? In which case it doesn't matter because you can lead by example. But the reality is, if you're not that person, you can't change the behavior of the people above you, right? You can only change your behavior and lead by example. So for example, if you are working in a firm and that firm says, we believe in work-life balance, and you tell your team, we believe in a good work-life balance, but you sit there until 9 o'clock on a Friday night, all right, or 11 o'clock, whatever the case may be, and you're telling them that we believe in work-life balance, but you're showing them something different. Now, if you walked out that door at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and said, I've put in enough hours for this week, I think you all should go home, it might take a while, but people will start to eventually believe that you really are walking the walk. And also going back to Satano's question about how do we encourage people to give us honest feedback, and being Asian and we don't like this direct stuff, there's different ways of giving feedback. But I need to show you that I value the feedback that you give me. So this is why I suggested earlier on that you've got to ask people to give you feedback, encourage them so that they start to know that is part of our new norm, right? And again, you've got to lead by example. So if let's say, Bernie, I asked for feedback and you gave me feedback and I didn't like the feedback and I reacted badly and I don't talk to you for the next couple of weeks, or we go out for lunch and I forgot to invite Bernie, because he doesn't like me, kind of stuff. What's the example you set? So as leaders, as managers, we've got to take it on the chin. I might like it, but I've got to let go of my ego, and what can I learn from that? And how might I be able to change my behavior? Now, in the interest of time, I think we need to move on from there, because David mentioned the concept of a prize, and there is a lucky draw. And I think, David, do you want to announce the lucky draw prize, or would you like? Yeah, why don't you? Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of our co-hosts, Helen's going to be performing the lucky draw for all of us. First of all, I would like to thank you, everybody, for your participation. Helen, would you mind showing this showing a screen, of our lucky draw reel? Helen, maybe you can share your screen to all of our audience as well.
Maybe do I need to stop sharing my screen? Maybe that's
maybe yes, you're right. Yes.
Maybe I'll stop sharing for a moment. Maybe that makes it easier for Helen to do that. Here we
go.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got all the names on the lucky draw reel. I just want to make sure all of your names are in here. If everybody see the names not in here, please let us know. We'd love to include you as well. But I do believe we have all of the names here. So Helen, if you can you just spin the wheel and see who's the lucky winner today? And our prize is actually enjoying 90 minutes complimentary session with Eric Sampson. Okay. Whoa, we got a winner.
Congratulations. Congratulations
to
Edward. Fantastic.
We got a winner.
All right, so Edward, we'll be in touch with you and we'll work on the logistics for that. So the prize is a 90-minute coaching session with myself. And if you're in Hong Kong, we can do it face-to-face. If not, we can do it on Zoom, and it can be on the topic we've covered today, or anything that's important to you that you want to have some direction or some focus on, and we'll leave that up to you as well. And I think I'll just go back and share my screen again, because there's a couple of final things that we want to incorporate in here. Here we go. Okay, so we'd also really welcome your feedback for what we've covered today. So there is a QR code that you could complete, and please, it'll only take a minute or two. a few questions around the format and things like that. But we're also very interested to find out from you whether there are any other areas that you would like us to focus on in the future, or any follow-up webinars that we might have. So please do share your thoughts, share your views, give us honest feedback. We can take it on the chin if there's things that you'd like us to do differently or better. We'll be fine with that. That's the reality of living in this world. So just leave that there maybe for a moment or two for you longer. And then remember, David mentioned the egonomics exercise. So if you didn't get a chance to do that, here's your opportunity to follow the link. So I'll just bring it up there for you. So the one that says there on the side, Egonomics, it will take you to the questionnaire that you saw. And if you follow the link and you answer those 5 questions, we will then be able to show you what the potential flip side of that would be in terms of how the people around you, maybe your team, could even be your senior management, how they might perceive you, and potentially a negative way, which then allows us to think about maybe how we have to moderate our behavior, and how we have to sometimes let go of our ego as well. And last but not least, there is also a link to our WhatsApp business account if you would like to contact us and talk to us about any potential training or coaching that might come up from that. No hard sell. Or you're very welcome to visit the website, or even drop us a line directly at info@drihk.com. And then I guess the only other thing for me is to say to everyone, thank you so much for attending today. And David, thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about what is really a very, very important topic, and one that's really going to impact on all of us in this post-COVID environment. So thank you for coming today, and hope to get a chance to maybe see you at some stage in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, for being my co-host today. I think you shared some really valuable insights. I'm sure that 90 minutes is probably not enough. So I really encourage people who have come in to send us feedbacks, question into our email, so that myself or Eric could address you in the future. And I understand all of you have taken your lunch time to join this session. So I understand you guys must be hungry. So please go grab something to eat. I really appreciate you being here during this time of the hour. So look forward to seeing all of you again. If any of your colleagues are not able to watch this live, we have recorded the session, and then we'll be sending you a copy in the future. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Goodbye.
Thank you. And maybe just one final thought. I believe we're also going to share the presentation as well for those who would like a copy of that. That's not a problem for us to do that too. So thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.